Today I've got Rolfe William Swinton with me, who works at Realitymind. You're going to be speaking at the MRMW conference in Berlin this year. Is that right, Rolfe?
That's right. Looking forward to it.
Can you give me a little bit of an introduction about you and your company?
Realitymind is a 3-year-old business that is focused on bringing tools to help better understand consumer behavior and what drives changes in consumer behavior. Primary technologies we've developed are things around passive mobile measurement and other forms of passive behavioral measurement, and then the associated analytics that are necessary to make sense of that data.
Yeah.
What we do is we generate really massive amounts of data from what people do and how they do it, looking at what they do on their devices and through their devices, which gives us a very powerful lens into people's worlds. So, in a nutshell, that's what it is that we do.
And it's taken as said that would be on a mobile platform as well, right?
Yes, mobile is the primary lens through which we look. Obviously, then tablets and PCs, and even through looking at what people are seeing on their television or things like that. But mobile is the most important, unique focus that we're giving.
Can I ask you, Rolfe, have you been to MRMW before? Is it your first time? Are you a seasoned pro?
Yeah, in fact, I spoke at the very first MRMW conference, and so I've been able to take part in many, not all, but many of the conferences. I think it's a really valuable event. It certainly brings lots of different perspectives together. What I think is a big change, which I've been seeing, and I think will be certainly reflected at Berlin, is from the first show, people were asking the question, will people want to use mobile for market research? And now the question is obviously no longer not will they, but rather what are the most powerful and relevant ways that can be used, and how should it be used? And I think what's great now is we're starting to get a lot of really good examples about the very innovative ways that people are using it in a whole host of different contexts.
I've written down, I wanted to ask you what your opinion was, between, say, maybe last year and what was going on there and now.
Certainly from my view, there's been just a massive shift in the business. From our perspective, our business has grown over 400% this year.
Wow.
And I think that really goes to sort of where the world has come from. If I go back, 3 years ago, people were like, hey, let's try out this idea of passive mobile measurement. Let's try, an experiment out. Let's see, can we get views on cross-media behavior? Can we understand the context of mobile in people's lives? And then oh, yeah, okay, we can do it. And then last year was where people were starting to think, well, okay, how do we start to do this more at scale? How do we try to apply this? And this year, everyone's like, can we, but rather we must, and how do we put our foot down on the gas to really do this properly as client demand really around the world grows? And we've been finding we're now running things in over 30 countries in just about every language set you can imagine, and that really is, I think, a function of certainly the importance in understanding consumer behavior in ever more detail and finding more effective ways to get to it. I just noticed, for example, the SMR just published some research on the decline of survey research, and as Ray Pointer had also noted in his own predictions on the decline of that. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that those budgets which would have gone to standard survey research now can be channeled into different ways of really getting to the real drivers of behavior and the kinds of things we're able to provide.
Traditionally, my impression was that market research was a little bit sort of conservative, and so maybe online research, you might have to work quite hard to persuade someone to take what they perceive to be a risk to do it. But would you think that mobile research is that it's easier to persuade someone to do it because it's so self-evident? Everybody's got a mobile phone, everybody uses them. Although I suppose it's true of computer, but do you think there's a point to that?
I think that from a researcher perspective, it's still been a big step because it's a massive change in methodology. From a consumer perspective, I think that people are getting smarter about how to make research relevant to people, and not just recognize that it's going to be a matter of hey, I'll pay you an incentive and you'll give me some answers to some questions, but rather, how do I, as a researcher, make this something exciting to you and interesting to you that you'll want to be involved with this and help shape this? And so I think that also drives a very different kind of behavior and adoption of people getting involved in mobile-based research.
I would be really interested in what you thought about if I was to ask you about, say, like Android, Windows, and then Apple. I mean, that's bound to be what people are thinking. Like, what are the differences between?
I think really, if you look at the data, there's really just right now two platforms for most of the world in terms of the smartphone platforms. Obviously, there really is. It's a two-horse race in the smartphone world. Android and Apple duking it out for supremacy. Unfortunately, the Windows is really a distant runner-up, as is BlackBerry, is receding at the time. But don't forget that for a vast slice of the world, the feature phone market is still very much a real thing, and Nokia is still very present in that market, even though it's you don't really see it. Then the world continues to change, and the drive of smartphone adoption is massive.
Is it still the case that Apple users are a little bit more willing to put their hands in their pocket? I don't know if that's quite related, but I remember reading that a while back.
Do you know what we're seeing is that if you look at the profiles of users in terms of their demographics and psychographics, that you don't see there's no division. Like you may get on average, because there's so many more Android users, you have as many affluent Android users as you have iOS users. So I don't think that when you look on the population aggregate that that's not necessarily the case. I think you may see that people are willing to spend. Technology may be slightly more important as a statement about themselves with the Apple users, but really there are as many affluent users on Android as there are on iOS.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to be speaking about in Berlin?
Yeah, we're going to be focusing on how people can start to really get unique understandings through these tools and technologies. Because we think it's great, as people are talking about, oh great, I can do mobile passive research, right? Really, does that really matter? Does anyone really care about the tools? Rather, what we're focusing on is to help people understand how you can get unique views on consumer behavior and how you, as a business, can help apply that to reach your potential customers or your existing customers more effectively, understand when to get to them at the right time, what kind of message to deliver to really resonate with them, and how can that affect by the context of their lives. And so what we're going to be presenting is a look at perspective on consumers' lives as seen through sports fans of the course of this year. We've been looking, amongst other things, at how people have engaged with major sporting events throughout 2014. So from starting off with the Super Bowl in early January, through people watching the Winter Olympics, through to people viewing March Madness, a big basketball tournament in the U.S., to watching the World Cup, and on. That in all these events, what we find is that there's been a remarkable difference in how people consume these kinds of sporting events and how that impacts the context of their lives around them. And so whether or not people are really interested being sports fans or interested in sports media, that's not really the most important thing. What we do is we're going to give people a very specific lens to look at about how the context in our lives really affects how we feel about stuff, affects how we consume media, affects how we behave when we go shopping, when we go buying and not, and help to paint a very rich picture of the sort of 360-degree view on people's lives and how that impacts the behaviors and attitudes they have.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that, or is this something we're going to find out when you give the talk?
Sure. Well, just give you a couple of snapshots that some of the interesting things we've seen is, for example, let me just compare how people consumed watching the March Madness basketball tournament versus the World Cup football tournament, where in March Madness, just because of the time of the year and the time of the games, it turns out that the tournament really wasn't that mad at all from an emotional point of view or from a viewer point of view. Most of the people who were watching the basketball tournament ended up actually watching it at home but on their own, as opposed to the sort of, you imagine with the name itself that people will be having wild and crazy parties, getting together and celebrating it. Well, in fact, most people were alone, kind of relaxed, enjoying the games, and would be bantering with friends through social media. Whereas the World Cup was really quite the opposite. It was a very social event. People tended to watch the games together with groups and were in a much more excited and festive spirit. And so,
you did much better than us, didn't you?
Yes, well, we won't talk about that for the sake of not alienating UK-based viewers. But yeah, the Americans had a particularly good run. But I think it's the thing, which is when you can start to draw out these distinctions, you can see Well, me as a marketer, when is really the right time to reach my audience? When are they in a particularly hot state? They're going to be particularly receptive to a message versus other times. Where does that fit in the path of purchase? And if I'm a retailer or a manufacturer and I'm trying to figure out what's the path to purchase look like, and when do I really want to connect with potential shoppers, we're going to give some views on how you may be able to impact that in a much more specific way than I think anyone can currently see. So there should be some interesting stories on that, and help ground it in some very specific situations that most of us can get our heads around.
And what time will you be giving that talk? What day and what time?
It's we're talking on the 24th in the early afternoon.
It's the first time I've ever gone to a market research event. Have you got any tips, or sort of what's it going to be like for me? You know, anything to do or to avoid doing?
The thing I would advocate you do is really come with some good pointed questions from your point of view. I think the more that we help challenge presenters with real world questions and ways to think about challenging what they're presenting to make it as relevant as possible, as useful as possible, is really helpful, because everyone's trying to present stuff where they're trying to help push the envelope in terms of what people are doing. And so I think the more that you can help challenge the presenters to think about things from your perspective, really that much the better.
I can see what you mean. Is there anyone or any talk that you're going to be looking forward to hearing or speaking to, if that makes sense?
You know, for me, it's always what I always enjoyed most about it is the things which I wouldn't have expected. So I really try to make an effort to go to people who I've not heard about before, things I haven't seen about, to go and find out what people are up to, because there's so many people trying so many things that it's those things that I haven't heard about before that I find most surprising and are really most interested in learning from. So.
That's brilliant. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and spending some of your sort of valuable time with us, Rolfe.
Well, likewise. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you in Berlin.
Excellent. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.